When's in Doubt. I'm Amanda Freebairn, and my co-host tonight is Daniela Mara-Prey. And tonight we are delighted to be joined by Dr. Valerie M. Hudson. Dr. Hudson is a University Distinguished Professor and holder of the George H.W. Bush Chair in the Department of International Affairs at the Bush School of Government and Public Service at Texas A&M University, where she directs the program on women, peace, and security. Dr. Hudson is also the senior editor, correct, at Square Two Journal, is that right? Square Two is an online journal of thought based on the restored gospel of Jesus Christ concerning important issues of the world today. You can find Square Two at square2.org. And tonight we're going to be discussing aspects from Dr. Hudson's recent Fair Mormon talk entitled The First Political Order of the Priesthood. You can find her article, Understanding the Priesthood, which discusses the same topic at square2.org. Dr. Hudson, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I was delighted to learn about Uplift, so I'm excited to be here.
All right.
Excellent. So we'll alternate between the questions that we have prepared ahead of time, and I'll be starting. The first one we have for Dr. Hudson is about your personal faith. So did you ever arrive at a fork in the road with your faith where one choice would lead you away from the restored gospel and the other choice would lead you toward the restored gospel? What was that fork in the road, and how did you navigate making that choice?
Thanks, that's a good question. I don't think there's just one fork in the road. I think there were many forks in the road for me, and each one had their own flavor, if you will. I was baptized when I was 13, and it was not my real choice. My mother had decided that my brother and I and her would all get baptized in the Mormon church, and I didn't know very much about it. And so we got baptized, and I don't think I ever really considered myself a member of the church, but God arranged it so that I ended up at Brigham Young University for my undergraduate, and I really, really struggled. This was BYU in the early 70s, and goodness, we weren't allowed, to wear pants. It was just it was so foreign and alien to me. It was very, very difficult, and I remember struggling, really hard to gain a testimony. And I felt like I did a lot of work, learned a lot. And then it wasn't really until my first child was born that all of a sudden everything that I had learned sort of clicked for me and made sense. And from that time on, I considered myself a sincere member of the church. And then as I was investigating women's issues in the church in the early to mid 90s, it was also true that there were times, I remember distinctly once, I was a professor at BYU, so I remember standing in front of the library during a class change and watching all the students go by and just wanting to say, how can you women even be members of this church? Because I'd been, in trying to, uncover church doctrine about women, you're inevitably led to the Journal of Discourses and to a lot of the really nasty things that Brigham Young had to say about women. And I remember thinking, good heavens, how can women be members of this church? And that was a big fork in the road for me. And it meant years of studying and figuring out what the doctrine really was. And one of the keys was discovering that teachings and doctrine are not the same thing, and that there's a lot of things that were taught by even prophets such as Brigham Young. They're just flat out wrong. They are not in harmony with the doctrine of the church. So learning how to figure the difference out. In fact, one of the very first articles I wrote for Square Two was about that very thing. And the church had issued a statement called the 4 May Statement that talked about the difference between teachings and doctrine. And that was a great key. And so as I learned more, I began to understand that the things that we think are the doctrine of the church concerning women, in many cases, are simply not doctrinal at all.
Yeah, thank you. I think that that sort of that issue kind of expands to not just its important concept in terms of women's issues, but also in a lot of things that people struggling with faith struggle with, just trying to figure out, is this, I saw this quote or I read this thing and it doesn't sit right with me that, you know, Brigham Young said, or that a past prophet or apostle said, and it doesn't seem like it makes sense, or maybe it directly contradicts something that a different prophet or apostle said. And so learning to kind of distinguish or figure out, how do I know if this is real doctrine? How do I know if this is truth, if this is personal opinion? And also, if a prophet is speaking from personal opinion, then how do we exactly understand or know that this person is a prophet if they can say things that are wrong? So I think with people, particularly in faith crisis, that's a really challenging issue. You know, what is a prophet? And if he can say these wrong things, then how do I, you know, sort of navigate that? So it's interesting to hear that in terms of like, you know, struggling with women's issues, but that's also something that we've seen with issues of statements about race, issues of statements about other challenging topics. So in your experience, one of the groups of people that we minister in to in Uplift are people in either mixed faith marriages, mixed faith families. We have people join Uplift because their son or daughter or sister or brother or husband or wife are struggling with the gospel. What is one effective way to strengthen relationships of people who have different beliefs? So for people who have friends and family who have left the church, or for friends and family who just have never been associated with the church?
That's a great question. And I think it goes to the heart of how any member of the church moves through this world, because, you know, if you look at the figures, you know, what we got, 16, 17 million people, you know, there's 0.001% of the world's population. So, you know, we're in a situation where we're a very tiny minority of humanity. And I'm not gonna pretend that I have any great keys. I have, you know, most of my best friends actually are not members of the church at all. And that's just like never been a problem, because they know who I am. They know I'm a member of the church. If they have questions, they ask me. If we're talking about something that seems to like touch on you know, a belief of mine, I'll probably say the belief. And I mean, we've just always been kind of cool with that. But you know, I do know that I think the naughtier question, if you will, is those who've left the church, or ultimately very intimate relationships, like between husband and wife. I spent my first marriage with a non-member, and that was very, very difficult. And I think at the end of the day, he left me because I would not relinquish my faith. Would not relinquish going to church. I would not relinquish doing a lot of things that he thought offended him personally. And so it was his choice to leave. It was not my choice. I was prepared to stick it out. And, you know, I think it was very heartbreaking for me personally. And I know that the divorce was very destructive to the 2 children that we had together. And I think, I also have a very good friend who recently left the church, and that's been difficult. Our communication is significantly less than it was before. It's not non-existent, but it's significantly less than it was before, because there's always the chance that I think we may cross issues that would be difficult to navigate, where truth claims would just be set against truth claim. And so I think there is a natural distancing that tends to happen when you're in very close relationships. And so I don't have any great keys for navigating those, but in terms of just colleagues and friends and so forth, I've never really encountered issues there. I don't know if that rings. I don't think I've contributed at all to that answering that question, but that's my experience.
Thank you. Yeah, when it comes to relationships with people that either leave the faith that you have been a part of, or that naturally came together as a result of being different, being of different faiths, I think the best thing that you can do really is therapy. Personal and couple or family related is really been the best thing, because when you have something that's so close to two people that comes at odds with each other, I think one of the best things that you can do is find a neutral third party that can help you to alleviate some of that pressure that is felt with being in something that can be such an intense difference of opinions. So, but thank you for that. Thank you for being so open about your personal life as well. That's something that always touches me when we do these interviews, is getting to know the people that we talk with, especially in the new way, people that we've only read articles from or seen in other podcasts. So thank you for your openness. The next question we have has to deal with your essay that you wrote, Understanding the P Priesthood. In this essay, as well as in your recent Fair Mormon talk, and in other places, you have talked about a divine priestesshood, the power of Heavenly Mother delegated on earth to her daughters. Can you talk a little bit more about what that entails and how you came to your understanding of priestesshood?
About that in my mind for many years now. It's been very interesting to me, especially as a convert to the church, to sort of see this elaborate dance that we all seem to do around the notion that women have priesthood power, and trying to reconcile that with the fact that women do not hold priesthood office. Right? How do you hold power but you don't hold office? It just seems a little strange. And so I've seen in the Mormon community a strand, a school of thought that suggests, well, the way this is going to happen is one day women will be ordained to priesthood office, right? Just like totally does not accord with my experience or understanding of these things. To me, the church doctrine clearly states that there is a divine feminine and a divine masculine, that God is an exalted man and an exalted woman married in the new and everlasting covenant of marriage. And if that's the case, then I think the sort of very simplistic idea that one day the church will wake up and realize that women should be deacons or teachers or priests or elders or whatever is really silly. It underestimates the divine feminine. It just totally does not see the power of the feminine at all, and doesn't see it as any sort of distinct power. Whereas I certainly experience the power of the feminine as being quite different than the divine masculine, the masculine. But that these differences do not create a hierarchy, but that these differences create a richness and interdependence that is the foundation of everything that we call love everything that we call good. I mean, the word God comes from the word good. So the idea that this partnership between the feminine and the masculine is not just divine, but is the foundation of all good, would be lost if we took that kind of simplistic approach. So, you know, when you start to excavate things, as my colleague Maxine Hanks talks about it, I mean, there was a clear understanding at the beginning of the church that Joseph Smith was trying to organize a kingdom of priestesses. And I think it's really funny that they had to use the word kingdom, because they didn't have any word that would suggest what he was trying to get across. And that one day we will steps within the discipleship have their ordinances women preside over, and then this is part of salvation. And the priestess expect sometime before I to see as American woman, we will strange to admit that there's power of the divine feminine away.
Oh, looks like Valerie just froze out. Hopefully she comes back in a second. While we're waiting for her to come back in, we will be sharing in the comments and as we upload this, her essay that we just mentioned that we put reference to. So everyone that's watching the live will be able to check it out with us. So
and she also gave a talk on this topic at the Fair Mormon Conference in August. The transcript and the video of that are not, the free version are not up yet, just for those who purchase the live stream. But if it becomes available soon, I will put the link for that as well. I know that they're working on getting transcripts and done and videos up. So thank you for those of you who are watching and being patient with us.
while we wait for her to come back, let's go ahead and take some questions that we've been getting from the Facebook Live so that we can start tackling some of those. All right, Amanda, if you, So the first question that we have is how can we as women feel connected to Heavenly Mother? So Amanda, would you like to start with that, and then I'll step in after you're done.
Sure. We definitely have this question a little bit planned to discuss with Dr. Hudson as well, so we'll get her input on it in a bit. But for me, what has helped me a lot, I studied literature in college. I really resonate with art. A lot of people who are in the Uplift women's group will know some of the literature and art that we've sort of plugged before. There's a wonderful book called A Girl's Guide to Heavenly Mother that has a lot of art quotes and poetry about Heavenly Mother that I really love and that I read to my daughters. That's been a really beautiful way to sort of introduce that doctrine. I think also just kind of getting used to talking about Heavenly Mother in the same way that we feel comfortable talking about Heavenly Father. When I talk to my daughters about the gospel. They're just little, but when I talk to them, it's really kind of still a little bit tricky for me to remind myself when I talk about Heavenly Mother or Father, just to say we have a Heavenly Father in heaven who loves us, and we have a Mother in heaven who loves us, or Heavenly Father and Heavenly Mother want this for us. Heavenly Father, this is Heavenly Father and Heavenly Mother's plan of salvation. Just kind of getting it into my mind, and using that, getting used to using that language of Heavenly Father and Heavenly Mother, or Heavenly Parents. I think just introducing that concept into our everyday discussion of the gospel helps us sort of be more in tune with Heavenly Mother, think about her as we're praying, as we're studying the gospel. So that's sort of what's helped me.
To add on to that, I think a big thing for me in terms of connecting to the Heavenly Mother has to do with finding experiences where you can feel her. For me, it was a lot of going to the temple, which I think is perhaps counterintuitive for some people. But those are actually the experiences where I had the most feelings of feminine divine, because in my opinion, it is a very, very different feeling to feel Heavenly Mother's presence than it is to feel Heavenly Father's. I think the first time that I ever really felt the presence of Heavenly Mother, I was working in the initiatory as a newly endowed sister, and I was listening to the blessings that the other sisters were giving, and all of a sudden, kind of surrounded by these flowy white veils and hearing women's voices, there was this spirit that overwhelmed me that was unlike anything I had ever really felt before. And I returned to the temple looking for those similar feelings, because I do believe that Heavenly Mother occupies that space. So it looks like Valerie, Dr. Hudson is back. So thank you so much for joining us again. Sorry for that quick little blip. Did you have any other comments that you wanted to add, talking about your essay or anything before we move forward?
I was just going to finish the thought. I'm sorry. I don't know what happened. I got kicked
That's
off.
okay.
And I don't know why. But what I was going to say is that temple marriage then is the blending of the priesthood and the priestesshood, which is why I think that gods are married in the new and everlasting covenant, right? To be omnipotent, right? You would have to, as a couple, have the power of the priesthood and the power of the priestesshood together, united together. And that's why I use the neologism priesthood, right? Two P's, PP, priesthood. To try to indicate that, you know, women's priesthood has not been subsumed, right, but rather added. That male and female priestesshood added together are, in fact, what we're calling the power of godliness.
Absolutely. When I first read the article, I have spiritual experiences, but it was definitely one of those moments where you read it and it's a spiritual experience, almost feeling like remembering, where you read it and you think, that's it. And at that time, it was quite hard for me to kind of digest what you were talking about when it came to discussing women and their divine priesthood having to do with the ordinances associated with the female body, because at that time I was dealing with infertility. Well, still am, but I was starting to recognize all of these things because I had decided with my husband that we were going to try for a child, right? And so that's, for me, was a big indicator of the truthfulness of what you were talking about, because it wasn't just, I feel nice reading this, it was in direct contrast with what I was experiencing in my own life, and yet God took that moment to speak to me and to confirm that to me when I was struggling with something that was so opposite of everything that you were saying. So absolutely, I believe this. These are things that I have absorbed into my soul and really connect with in a spiritual way. So
I don't know about you, but to me, it just sort of feels like, well, of course. Right? And sort of going back to the old idea that women are somehow got power, but they don't have, you know, it just has that thought of, it just makes reason stare, right? Mm-hmm. That I can't go back to seeing it the old way, because the new way is just rings so true, right? That there is a divine feminine power, and that it is not identical but is united, right, with the power of the divine masculine.
Absolutely. Amanda and I talked about this one time. Go ahead, Amanda. Yeah.
No, please. Go ahead.
Yeah. I was reading last year, I read Live Up to Your Privileges by Wendy Ulrich. And she has a little anecdote in her book where she discusses a blessing she got while being pregnant, where it said that she would learn more about the Savior during her pregnancy than she had ever experienced. And she discusses reading the books and the articles and listening to the talks and having some great, nice, fluffy feelings. And then she started her birth, right? She went into labor. And all of a sudden, as that pain came and all of the things that come with birth came to her, she thought, oh, that's what it meant. And Amanda and I, in becoming friends and discussing this concept of priesthood and how do we struggle with women's roles and how our lives fit into the plan of salvation, we brought up that story actually, and we discussed it and said, actually, this makes sense. This is probably what it is. And there was power again in that conversation. So I think that the Lord is telling us or testifying of it at least. I can't pin down outside of work like yours, women who really discuss those things or someone in leadership who's discussed things in that way that I can point to in a Relief Society lesson. I mean, I bring it up anyway, but I've yet to find someone that encompasses those words in the way that I want to explain it. So.
Well, you know, in the older church, there was open metaphors being made between the atonement and birth, and a really great essay to find some of those old comments, as well as just a really great overview of how birth and pregnancy and lactation are ordinance-like, is that wonderful essay by midwife Annalisa Leonhardt in Square 2 called The Sacrament of Birth. So if you've not read that essay, I heartily recommend it. And I'd be delighted to provide links to all of you after this is over.
Thank you. Yeah. So I've one of the things that has stood out the most to me, both in your essays and just listening to other Latter-day Saint women discuss this topic, is the number of times in which Christ is referred to, or his mission is referred to, using feminine terms, motherly terms, talking about, you know, could a mother hen forget her chicks? Like all of these examples of Christ, that they are not just embodied in the masculine. There are so many that are embodied in the feminine. And in my own experience, my most profound spiritual experiences have been in the struggle in the last few years, the pain and the joy of having children. I have had a lot of pregnancy complications and difficult childbirth, and that has been the time that I have had to rely on not only the Lord the most, but also my own spiritual power, and feel the most in touch with my spiritual power. So this concept makes a lot of sense to me. Like you said, it makes reason stare, but I do have friends who, whether they struggle with infertility or just have not had the opportunity to marry, who may struggle with this kind of conception. And Daniela kind of addressed it already a bit with her experiences in infertility. But is there anything that you would sort of add to those who, you know, recognize the blessing and the importance of these ordinances of lactation, of childbirth, of pregnancy, but also kind of maybe feel a little bit left out because they haven't been able to have children?
You bet. You bet. I think issues such as infertility, I think even, you know, mixed religious marriages that we were referring to before, same-sex attraction, affliction comes to everyone, but there's certain afflictions that kind of hit you in your spirituality in a different sense. You know, so, you know, the issue is, it looks like I'm being prohibited somehow from living, right, the sort of covenant path that we are all enjoined to live. And I think those are special and very, very difficult types of affliction. So I'm certainly not going to minimize that. And I can tell you that when in my first marriage, when I was married to a non-member, you know, that I experienced it as one of the worst spiritual afflictions, just really, 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 really painful. But I think that, you know, we also have to recognize that every single one of us is going to face an issue like that. And in fact, that's why we signed up for this life, is that we knew that there would be something tailor-made for us in this life that would hit us in just that way. And so it's a major test of faith. We're told that this life is but a very short blink in our eternal existence, and that no blessing will be withheld from the righteous. So infertility, lack of marriage, etc., we are told is but a mortal condition for those who are righteous, and that every righteous woman can look forward in hope and confidence to being married and to being a mother in eternal Zion. And furthermore, as I've tried to make plain in all my writings, you know, biological motherhood is but one manifestation of motherhood. It may be one of the most eloquent expressions and manifestations of motherhood, but it is not the only one. You know, I've you know, mentored hundreds of students in my career as an academic, and there are some that I absolutely think of as my sons and my daughters. And so I don't think that we can collapse the divine feminine to simply, you know, physically getting pregnant and giving birth and nursing in this lifetime. No, right? Just as if we step back and look at it, you know, the vast, vast, vast majority of men will never hold priesthood office or officiate in ordinances in this life, right? They won't, but they can absolutely look forward to doing so in the next life. Now, I know that at the end of the day, that may still not be a satisfactory answer. And the reason it's not a satisfactory answer is that you are owed answers from God on this type of affliction. I had a daughter with the most amazing patriarchal blessing you can imagine, talking about the divine feminine and her future motherhood. And she died when she was 18. I know that she will be a mother in the next life. I know those blessings will not be denied to her. But of course it hurt to see those blessings not realized in her mortality. So at the end of the day, it's got to be between you and the Lord to figure this out. But does it mean that there isn't a priesthood, that there aren't priesthood ordinances? No, I don't think so. But I think for some of us, our wrestle with God will include, you know, being denied those in our immortality, often through no fault of our own at all.
I think that that's a really important point within the context just of faith crisis in general, that sometimes when we're struggling with our faith, whether it's one of these challenges like infertility or the loss of a child, or the kind of spiritual experiences like that you said that hit our spirituality really hard, and we struggle with our faith, we will hear things like, you know, you need to pray about it more. You just need to read your scriptures. And sometimes those are really shallow answers, but there is a deeper answer that is kind of similar, which is that you can talk to your Father in heaven, that you have a father and mother in heaven who love you, and that you can try to find answers from scholars, from friends, from bishops, and you should talk to all those people, and you should consult the scriptures, and all of those things are so valuable. But you also can receive the strongest and best answer by going directly to your parents in heaven. And they want you maybe not to have exactly the answer that you want, but they want you to have to be consoled and to feel loved and to feel attended to in your spirituality. I had a particular question that probably we shouldn't get into here, but it was polygamy. I struggled with polygamy for a long time. And
so tell me, you've read my essays on polygamy.
I have. I I always felt like, okay, these are good. I found some good answers, including your essays on the Abrahamic struggle. But it never really I never was really able to have sort of a peace. I could get an intellectual, like, okay, that makes sense. But the peace came when I didn't expect it to. And it didn't come from reading essays, and it didn't come from talking to smart people. It came from a lot of work in getting in touch with my heavenly parents. And it came one morning, and when I was getting my baby into my car, and I wasn't thinking about polygamy, and then all of a sudden the peace and the answer came. And which doesn't mean that polygamy is still not a hard question, but that I felt my specific answer from my heavenly parents. And that doesn't shake me in the same way that it used to. And so
that's
I
how you know when you've had a successful wrestle with God. That's how I knew. I co-authored a book called Women in Eternity, Women of Zion, which was an extensive and exhaustive investigation of what church doctrine about women really is. And God actually gave me a couple of years of searing pain over all of these issues. And I now understand why I had that pain. I was given that pain. So when I got answers that were true, the pain went away. And that was my testimony that these things were true. And I see that that has worked the very same way in your own life, where the pain was a gift that caused you and motivated you to study these things in your mind. Because remember, as Hugh Nibley was fond of saying, the Lord can't pour a 1-gallon revelation into a 1-cup mind. So you had to read, you had to study, you had to increase the capacity of your mind so that when that healing revelation came, it made perfect sense and the pain was gone. I see this as a pattern in our lives.
Absolutely. Amanda and I talk to a lot of the women that come to Uplift, and a lot of the pain is something, first of all, that we relate to, but it's so communal amongst so many people. And after a while of being with these women and talking to these women, I started to realize that there was a purpose behind it. Being in a place like this, it's easy to think, well, everybody goes through faith crisis because you work with people who go through faith crisis. But when I moved to Mexico, I got an incredibly different experience on the plan of salvation, right? I moved to a place that I was not familiar with, and all of a sudden, just thousands of people that didn't look like me, talk like me, and I didn't understand why they did the things they did culturally and in so many different ways. And one of the things that kind of helped me through my faith crisis, and I talked about this a little bit with one of the authors of The Girl's Guide to Heavenly Mother, MacArthur Krishna, who lived in India with her husband for many years and married a man who wasn't a member of the church, was that stretching, that expanding is necessary. That pain is incredibly necessary for us to be able to grow and to enter into the rest of God. I remember thinking about that a lot as I talked to people that were going through that pain. This next question is very, very personal for me, especially, and I've shared this story in Uplift before in the form of a short essay. But as I mentioned earlier, I was a temple worker for a couple of years. And when I first went through the temple, I was just shocked. It was the most godly experience I had ever had. I didn't feel pain like some of my friends did when they went through, because I couldn't even hear the words. It was just a direct conduit of spirit between me and the divine. I said after that moment that I wanted to work in the temple, and I did start working in the temple. And then all of a sudden I had to memorize the words, right? And so mine came after having that first witness, which was kind of a struggle for me. And one day when I was giving the initiatory, I had the most clear revelation that I had ever had, specifically referencing a part of the initiatory where we talked about subservience to husbands, right? In a form. And when I was saying that, all of a sudden it felt like I had been electrocuted. I don't know how else to describe it, because I almost felt like falling over. And I just felt incredibly strongly that wording, I don't know if I still don't know how to articulate it. I don't know if it was that it was wrong, that it wasn't right, that it would go away, but something like that. And it was many years later, 2019, the last year, where they changed it. But every time I went to the temple between then, I just stopped paying attention to those words because of that witness that I had. When they changed the temple ceremony last year, when they made the adjustments in the wording, I was ecstatic. I went to the temple immediately. I was overjoyed. I felt fantastic, incredible. And then talking to some women in our group, some of them expressed that same excitement, and then they had gone to the temple and they said to me, isn't it just the same thing but with different words? And then all of my elation kind of faded. And that's something that I still think that I'm kind of mulling over in my brain each time that I go to the temple, where it now talks about, it removes some language, but now it talks about women having privileges only under the new and everlasting covenant, whereas men kind of have still that direct relationship with God. And I'll be honest, since that happened, I have been dying to ask you this question, because I have read and listened and seen everything that you've done, and you've talked about that change, that wording change specifically, and how you said, well, in one of the interviews you gave, you said to the person interviewing you, now I'll never have to have another phone call with a sister going through the temple where I have to talk her away from the edge. But that's not true, because here I am. So so I'm wondering what your thoughts are about that, because I honestly don't have a conclusion yet.
Sure. But I think we're talking about apples and oranges. I mean, there were women who left the church over how the wording used to be. And I think there are women who are still troubled by the wording, but I don't think it's the same degree. I think what we have now is so far, far better than what we had before that I'm not sure the comparison works. Early in my life as a sincere Latter-day Saint, I realized that I had a choice, which is that I could either believe that every last thing the church did in, let's see, when was, so like 1984, every last thing the church did in 1984 was perfect. And if there was a problem with it, then if I thought there was a problem with it, then the problem was with me. Well, I realized that you can't live like that, right? If you're in direct communication with your heavenly parents, then you can say to yourself, well, I may be living in 1984, but I know this is not the way they live in Zion. And so I expect to see in my lifetime the dewdrop upon dewdrop upon dewdrop that leads us inexorably towards that Zion. And that somehow the stretching and the reaching for Zion and the realization that what we have now is not Zion builds us and prepares us for that further light and knowledge. And is also a mercy to those whose testimonies are so fragile that if we just immediately went to Zion, they would freak out totally. So do I think there are certain things in the current ceremony that still need to be adjusted? You betcha. Am I absolutely, totally gobsmacked grateful that we have the changes we do? You betcha. Am I really interested in having the Houston Temple move to phase 3 so that I can do some ordinance work and see how they further change things? You betcha. Am I still hoping that there will be changes to the temple ceremony in the future? You betcha. You know, in other words, the fact that things are not yet perfect is fine, because every change that has been made is moving us closer to that perfection, and we all feel it and we all see it and we recognize it as such. So I'm not discouraged at all. I'm thrilled. And in fact, I think I even wrote an essay once in which I listed all the things that I expected to be changed by the time I died. Because I live my interior life in the Church of Zion, and not in the Church of 1984 or the Church of 2020. And so I can appreciate every step that we take here in mortality towards that end.
That's really beautiful.
This kind of reminds me, I loved Sister Bingham's talk at this last general conference when she kind of discussed just, and this sort of overlaps quite a bit with your professional work in terms of, you know, we're working closer to understanding women, moving away from a society in which we've brought into we've had a lot of harmful ideas about women. Women have been subservient, and in some places in throughout the world, they still often are. But she sort of framed, as we understand more about women's equality and women's power and women's capability, how that's sort of part of the restoration, and that sort of continues. And as we at the same time as we were getting the Relief Society, as Joseph Smith was introducing this was at the same time when the world was, when women were becoming more empowered, when women were, we started to see movements towards women's rights to vote in the United States. This kind of all goes together. It's part of the restoration of the gospel, and that continues, and it's so exciting to me. And I think that's a really good positive perspective. There are always going to be things that we feel aren't quite right, especially as women. We perhaps maybe have a strong intuition about things that maybe aren't quite right, or maybe we're still working on, but we can have the positive perspective of look how far we've come and how much the Lord is clearly directing the church in terms of positive improvement. So we're going to go ahead and move on. Danielle and I were talking a little bit about this while we were having technical difficulties, but men and women are also, our men are counseled to pray to our Heavenly Father when they're learning about priesthood. So he will distill the truths like dewdrops. Women were also recently counseled by President Nelson to pray and learn from Heavenly Father about the priesthood. And but how do we seek to understand Heavenly Mother and seek counsel from her? How can we encourage women to seek knowledge about Heavenly Mother, to become more comfortable about talking about Heavenly Mother, to being more comfortable about teaching their children about Heavenly Mother?
Oh, heck, just do it. I mean, let's be blunt. Let's reach out as women to the divine feminine force in the universe and learn from her. Let us teach our little daughters about their Heavenly Mother. In fact, I don't know if you saw the Faith Matters program that I did, but I actually showed how I created a necklace for each of my daughters that showed each of the steps for a woman, not a man, but a woman, towards their eternal destiny. And, you know, every birthday we get that necklace out and we talk about where they're at and where they're going. We talk about their destiny as a Heavenly Mother very openly. You're not going to get hauled into your bishop's office for teaching your daughters and sons about Heavenly Mother. Furthermore, another thing that we can do is we can begin to spiritualize our perception of our female bodies, right? So rather than viewing our body as simply something for males to consume with their eyes or with their own bodies, we ourselves need a feminine understanding of our bodies. We need to understand the power of our breasts and our womb and our ovaries and our curves and our hips and everything. We have such little regard for the female body in our culture that I'm just amazed and shocked by it all the time. You know, the tendency now among young women to turn their period off completely, using methods so they never have to bleed. All right, well, how the heck are you going to learn anything about the divine feminine, all right, if you can't even stand to bleed monthly, right? The idea that we should just be, the perfect birth is to be knocked out and then wake us up after it's all over. Well, it's just insane. How are you going to learn about the power of the divine feminine while you're unconscious, while giving birth, right? Or how quickly we say, well, I'll give breastfeeding a try, but really, you know, I think bottles would be far more convenient. Right? I mean, it's as if we're taking this incredible endowment of power and just saying, yeah, that's dross, that's trash, and I'm not really interested in it, and I don't think I can learn anything from it. Well, you know, I've really tried to stand against all of those practices. And other practices that I think really are antithetical to our understanding of the spiritual nature of female bodies, such as selling your eggs, which I think is completely anathema to the spirit of the divine feminine. So I think something else we've got to do is we've got to teach our daughters the power of our bodies in a way that they understand that our divine destiny is not to look like Kim Kardashian, right? But to fully mine, if you will, the power inherent in our bodies, and to value it and to value motherhood. So in terms of feminism, I've always considered myself a maternal feminist, that there is a wisdom and a power in maternity that if unleashed in the world would change it from top to bottom. So I think it's, you know, you should just go ahead and do it. Now, I'm not telling you to pray to Heavenly Mother because, you know, we've been told not to pray to Heavenly Mother. But I think that, in a sense, is going to change over time. I think it may have to do with the fact that I've come to believe that men preside over the fallen worlds, and I believe women in heaven preside over the worlds that have not yet been organized. And I'm certainly not going to go into why I believe that, but I believe that the Godhead is some sort of calling, three-person calling through the priesthood to preside over a fallen world, right? And so I think it's probably right that you address your prayers to Heavenly Father, but I always say, dear Heavenly Father, and I just know Heavenly Mother is listening. So if you could include her in this conversation, I would be delighted. And I just go for it. I've placed my hands on the shoulders of my sons, and I have prayed openly in faith that a blessing would fall upon them. Have I given them a priesthood blessing? No. Have I laid my hands on their shoulders and with all the power of the divine feminine given them a blessing? Yeah. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all. It's the prayer of faith that only a mother can offer. And the power of a mother's prayer is a blessing.
Thank you.
Absolutely
ahead,
had
Amanda.
that. I wanted to say that I concur with your experiences. I've had similar experiences as a mother where I felt prompted to pray for my children when they are going through afflictions. So when I had a baby wake up in the middle of the night in the middle of winter with croup cough, and having never heard that sound before and being absolutely terrified and not being able to calm myself. And my husband was terrified, and then just all of a sudden feeling like I could reach out to my heavenly parents and request help and request peace. I think that we should be mindful and aware of our power, and also be listening to the Spirit, because I think the Spirit will speak to us when we can. I think the Spirit will speak to us to show us our power as mothers, and just as women in general. I had that experience in that moment, at least.
Yeah, I think this is part of that apprenticeship, right, that you have to your Heavenly Mother, that you're going through these experiences and you're being guided in them to use your motherhood power to it's almost like in the very first Star Wars movie where Obi-Wan says, put the helmet on and reach out, Luke, reach out, and we women can do that. We can reach out. And not only that, I think that there are many heavenly ministers that are specifically female. I remember going, I did natural childbirth, and I remember at one point felt very, very strongly a female presence in the room telling me exactly how to move my body to alleviate the pain and facilitate the birth. This was not a male angel or male minister. This was specifically female. So I know full well that you can also be sent ministers from heaven that are female.
That reminds me, are you familiar with the Brian Krishiznik painting Angels, where there's the woman sitting and all of the angels are reaching down? Listeners, if you're not familiar with this this painting, it's just called it's called She Will Find What Is Lost. And it's a woman. Let's see. I think I can. I'm going to share my screen real quick. Let's see. I don't know, hopefully you guys can see that. If you can't, I'm sorry. But it's a painting of a woman who has angels reaching down and ministering. Oh, there we go. You can see it, reaching down to her. And many of the angels are women. You can see women reaching down and touching her shoulders. And I felt that experience a lot as a mother and as a missionary, and in a lot of my experiences, feeling a particular female presence.
Well said.
We're coming up on our hour right now. Apologize. We have a couple of questions from people that have just trickled in over the last little bit, but I want to check in. Is it okay if we cover a few more questions, or do you have time? Yes. Okay. Sure. Excellent. Fantastic. So we have one from a group member that actually references a metaphor that you used a few years ago of Dorothy and the red shoes in reference to women's ordination. So this person is a teacher. He's a teacher at a university. I actually know him. He said, I actually share that article as an optional reading in my sociology of religion class when we consider women in religion. I still get some students who feel that only ordination will suffice to give women an equal place with men in the church. How do you feel that that framework you set forth addresses or resolves the issues for women? And yeah, I think about that as well, because I shared that with one of my friends who had left the church and become an ordained women advocate, actually. And she said, no, she told me that wasn't enough for her. So we know that not all answers are going to satisfy everyone, and that's okay. Sometimes we have to learn with answers that are unsatisfactory, but like we keep talking about, the relationship with the divine helps to gap that. But what are your thoughts about that?
Oh, it's so funny to me how so many people who view themselves as champions of women insist that women can only be equal to men if they're identical to men. And I find that to be an ultimately deeply misogynist approach. The only way to do things, the only good way to do things is how men do things. how completely undervaluing that is of the feminine experience. All right, I think that's really hard to swallow. So no, my approach is that the priesthood and the priestesshood operate on the same principles, but they operate in very different manners. And in fact, I've threatened to write an essay for Square Two, in which I assert that women are a radically specific authority. We talk about general authorities in the church, but I think women become a radically decentralized godly power in the lives of most people. Right? And the classic example, of course, is motherhood, right? Until you're an old married lady, the person who knows you the very best in the universe in mortality is your mother, right? And so I think there is a sort of radical specific authority that is assigned to women, and it may not be your mother, it could be your sister. I mean, there are some very interesting things about how women operate, how they make linkages and bind ties in relationships and so forth, that is very, very different than what men do. And I also really believe that the Old Testament gives us a hint here that in fact women are ordained as they are born. You may recall that in the Levitical law, a woman is unclean for a certain number of days after the birth of a boy, but she is doubly secluded after the birth of a girl. And the period of time for which she is secluded is precisely the length of time that Aaron and his sons were secluded before they were ordained to the priesthood. So I feel that as women are born, they are receiving their ordination. They are given their woman's body. They are born, for example, with all the eggs they will ever have, whereas men are not even born with their gametes, right? They don't get their gametes till puberty. So for us to suggest that the way the divine feminine operates has to be the same way as the divine masculine, or it's not good enough, that's just another thought that makes reason totally stare. I'm sorry. We women do it differently. Yes, we're ordained, but we're ordained in a very, very different fashion and at a very different time. That's my take on it.
To add on to that,
oh, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Oh, thanks, Amanda. When there's a lot of, I like literature, right? So I was recommended a book upon some of my first fertility appointments about the female body. And it was a very radical book for me of things that I just never knew about myself and about all of these things. And referencing,
May I just say that is horrible, isn't it?
Yes, it was. It was very, very.
In which you know nothing about your body.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yes, I was very clueless when I went into these things. I knew something was wrong. I didn't know what though. And then all of a sudden I was given this book to read, and it was all news. All of it was news to me. And I had gynecologist appointments before. I had had sex education. I had all of these things, and it was very, very new. There's a chapter about the differences between men and women that you just mentioned, where men aren't born with the ability to produce sperm, and then they produce sperm until the day they die, right? Without that particular part. But one of the things that they referenced is how women, with their eggs, some of those eggs are female, and when you have a daughter, generations exist inside of you. And all of a sudden, reading this very, very secular book about women and women's bodies, the spirit enveloped everything around me, because all of a sudden, yes. All of a sudden, I realized that with women,
it's baked into your body, right? Yeah. The wisdom is baked into your body. And if you are kept from the knowledge of your body, you are kept from understanding the power of the divine feminine. There are so many amazing things about the woman's body that nobody knows, all right? And I even spend a day in my graduate classes going over some of the amazing things that they don't know about their own bodies. And it is stunning to me. And isn't this in fact, symptomatic of everything that we've been talking about, is that the loss of the knowledge of the power of women's bodies is concomitant with the suppression and the subordination of women, and the devaluing of all of their experiences and their insight and their wisdom. We cannot cure this, right? Unless the divine feminine arises once more, unless this knowledge is freely taught to all the daughters of the world. Can't happen. It's part of a piece.
Exactly. It just, that concept, that visualization as well, is having a daughter inside of your womb. And as that daughter's developing, she's developing her eggs. And inside those eggs, there are other daughters and other daughters. And it's, you know, the reference could be made to men as well, and to boys that you have, not to devalue the beauty that it is to have a son, but to have a daughter literally is this linked chain between all of the women that will come after you. And if that's not what we teach in the temple when you get sealed, I don't know what it is. And when we were talking, this didn't happen in the live, but after the live that Amanda and I shared with the authors of A Girl's Guide to Heavenly Mother, someone mentioned that they had to go breastfeed. I don't remember who it was. And one of Bethany Spalding said, you know, I was just talking to one of my friends that's breastfeeding right now, and she said, I had never understood the priesthood before this moment, where you can receive blessings from the priesthood or have the priesthood act through you, then in these times when I was experiencing lactation. And it just seems so apparent to me now in ways that it just never was growing up. And I wonder how my childhood would have been different, how my adolescence would have been different if I had known these things then, because I always felt that there was something missing. I was the kid that sat in seminary and said, well, what about Heavenly Mother? And I got an answer that we don't discuss women in the scriptures or in the Godhead or anything like that. And it hurt. It hurt a lot. And all of a sudden now in my adulthood, those answers are coming, and I want my children, not just my daughters, but my sons as well, to know those things, because I feel like it might help them in ways that it could have helped me.
Your instincts are right on, right? As we teach a generation of young men and young women these incredible truths, relations between men and women will change. And as relations between men and women change, the blessings of heaven will be poured out on us. Our cup will be overflowing, but we must heal that wound first. All right, we have to heal. There's going to be no peace on earth until there's peace between the sons and daughters of God.
And we sometimes, when we go to church, I'm a young women advisor, and I teach the young women, and I've been in young women for I think 4 or 5 years now. Danielle and I were talking about this earlier, that when I teach, I try really intentionally, both when I teach young women and both when I teach my daughters, to say Heavenly Parents, Heavenly Father, and Heavenly Mother as often as I can, when that's applicable. And it's still like a little bit awkward to me, and I have to just push through the awkwardness. Or sometimes I worry, like, oh, are one of the other leaders going to feel uncomfortable because they're going to think we're not supposed to talk about Heavenly Mother or whatever. You know, it's been great having the new Young Women theme. That's helped a lot with that feeling. But sometimes it just can be a little bit awkward when, you know, I have, you know, wonderful parents who think that, you know, women are just as wonderful as men. I never felt devalued in any way, but I still wasn't raised with, you know, the language of Heavenly Mother and Divine Feminine. And sometimes we have to like push through a little bit of the awkwardness or difference that we feel when talking about this, and remind ourselves that we're not being disrespectful, and we're not being irreverent by discussing the fact that femininity is sacred as well as masculinity.
Good job.
The final question that we have here is, so if we can't talk to our mother, how do we get to know her? And that's always a big
Nobody
theme.
said you can't talk to her. Of course you can talk to her. All right. You can't just say, dear Heavenly Mother, I'm going to pray to you now, apparently, right? But of course you can talk to her, and she wants to talk to you. In fact, for most of my young people who sit in my classes, the person who talks to them the most, texts them every day, and so forth, is their mother, for goodness sake. I mean, the idea that somehow mother is aloof, or maybe she's off shopping or something. That's just the stupidest thing I've ever heard of in my entire life. No, she wants to talk to us. She wants us to talk to her. All right. So I honestly think that you know, the idea that there's some barrier between us and Heavenly Mother and we can't learn from her, no, that's all in our heads. Right? Go talk to her. Find out more about your body. That's a great way of learning about how the power of the Divine Mother works. All right. Learn from your life experiences. Right. I think that all of these experiences that we're having as mortal women of really preparing us to live as a Heavenly Mother, right? Think about the lessons you learn even in a dating relationship. Think about marriage. Think about, you know, having little kids or having big kids or having adult kids who've moved out of the house. I can tell you that there's incredible lessons to be learned about Heavenly Mother at all of these stages. And so I don't think the heavens are closed to us at all in terms of learning from Heavenly Mother or from her teaching us. I think the heavens are open if we seek that knowledge.
I've had times where I'm struggling either with my kids or with my husband is wonderful, but I'm not the most patient wife ever. And sometimes my communication with Heavenly Mother has the tendency to be just me yelling, I need you to please help me. Please help me right now. I can't do this. This is something that I need a mother's help for.
Oh, lately I've been taking to talking to her and saying, I bet this is how you feel, right? This is something you want me to know. You know, for example, my adult children, as adult children do, are want to only call me when they're, you know, they're facing some sort of problem that I have to help them navigate through. And how wonderful it would be to just get a little text, how are you, Mom? No, that's not the way it works. I'm like, so this is kind of how your experience must be too, right, Heavenly Mother? And I, you know, I sort of feel the celestial nodding as she's like, yeah, all of this experience is going to give you knowledge about what it's like to live as a Heavenly Mother. You bet. Mm-hmm.
Someone sent me a message with some of the live comments. You mentioned that you weren't going to get into your idea of men presiding over the fallen world and women presiding over the worlds to come, but they're asking for it. So maybe if you write an essay, we'll share it, and and we can talk about that. And that would be good. Maybe some future writing ideas. Now, I think, do you have any other questions, Amanda? I think those are all the ones that have been sent to me personally before we finish.
Well, this was a lot of fun. Thank you.
No, I think that
I'm happy to send you some links. If you think some links to some of these essays, if you just send me an email, I will send you some links that your listeners might be interested in taking a look at if they haven't already. And happy to have people email me, right? Go for it. You email me.
Wonderful, thank you. Yeah, we will, the link to the Square 2 essay should be in this description. Any other, we will add anything else that Dr. Hudson sends us for those of you listening. And also for those of you listening, if you've not, for women, if you have not yet joined the women's group, Uplift Women's Studies, we have a particular group for women where we discuss, we have a lot of discussions about awesome essays and talks and just things that we're going through. We kind of like to think of it hopefully as an online relief society. So if you haven't joined that group yet and these are topics that you're interested in, we invite you to search for Uplift Women's Studies. So thank you so much for everybody who has joined us tonight. We're going to go ahead and turn off our live stream real quick. Dr. Hudson, if you wouldn't mind hanging on for just a second while we get this turned off.
Okay, I just turned off the live stream.
I see it's still recording, but the live stream is off on my end as well. So
yeah,
okay.
Yeah. So also.